Hey there YouTube lovers, my name is BB8 and today I am going to be re-reviewing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. The main reason I'm deciding to do a re-review of Scarlet and Violet is because of the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game. Since Scarlet and Violet has received a performance boost on Switch 2, so I thought I would come back to the game after reviewing it in 2023 and give it another review. So, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? And just before we get into the review itself, I thought I would provide a recap on what I originally thought about Scarlet and Violet when I first reviewed it. Back when I first reviewed the game, I did think Scarlet and Violet was quite a bold step with the direction it was going in, thanks to the open world design of the game. I did enjoy that the story was split into 3 paths, consisting of Victory Road, Path of Legends, and Starfall Street, allowing for freedom within the players. And while I did think the concept was interesting, the execution was varied, since Victory Road did bring traditional gym challenges, but the Elite Four and the Champion were disappointingly bland and generic. That is probably why I didn't enjoy this version of the Elite Four like I did in previous Pokemon games. I did enjoy the fun boss hunt structure of Path of Legends, improving the exploration mechanics within Koraidon or Miraidon, depending on which version of the game you chose. And Starfall Street did reimagine the Evil Team formula, but I did think the twists were a bit predictable. I did enjoy exploring the Great Crater of Paldea and meeting Paradox Pokemon, which I did find a major highlight of the game, but on the other hand, there was performance issues, low resolution textures, and static interiors, which in comparison to Sword and Shield, it made the world a bit empty, and when you enter the buildings, it just appears with a menu without an interior that you can explore. I did enjoy the terrestrialize mechanic, but in comparison to Sword and Shield, it didn't give Pokemon their own distinct design to when they terrestrialized. On release, I originally gave Pokemon Scarlet and Violet a 7.4 out of 10, but since I don't do decimal numbers in my reviews anymore, we'll have to see what the score is this time. And with that being said, let's get into the review. For the gameplay, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet did introduce a major shift from the series by going with a more open world structure compared to past games. The freedom to go through 3 different storylines in any order that you please, consisting of Victory Road, Path of Legends, and Starfall Street, was quite a refreshing change, allowing players to have the freedom to explore the world in any order that they like, while the core turn-based battle system does remain untouched, with the addition of mechanics like auto-battling through the Let's Go feature did improve the streamlining when it comes to grinding and engaging within the overworld, and each path does offer its own unique gameplay loop, with traditional gym challenges, Titan hunts for traversal upgrades for Koraidon or Miraidon, and base raids against Team Star. The open world traversal did evolve as players progress through the game, tying the gameplay itself to how players advance through the story. Terrestrializing, like the Pokemon games we've had since X and Y, did add a new gimmick to the Pokemon battles as well, allowing Pokemon to change their Terra type mid-battle. I did enjoy this gimmick, but unfortunately, unlike Mega Evolution or Gigantamax, terrestrializing didn't really change the appearance of the Pokemon. But I still think it was a cool feature though. In the Teal Mask, the gameplay felt a bit more contained, since it was centered around the land of Kitakami. While smaller, it did add some mini-games such as Ogre Alston and a photography side quest with Heron which does remind me a lot of Pokemon Snap. I do think these were nice additions to Scarlet and Violet, but unfortunately, the replay value of the Teal Mask was the reason the Teal Mask was the one area of the game I came back to the least. The Indigo Disc, however, did deliver the most engaging gameplay additions, with the Blueberry Academy League Club allowing the player to customize the room to their liking, and you can progress further with BP earned through side tasks. The terrarium biomes are created for the players to explore, with each offering wild starter Pokemon as you upgrade them, and most notably the Synchro Machine, which was one of my favourite features of the Indigo Disc, does allow you to control your Pokemon in real time. I always wanted a mechanic like this in a Pokemon game, and I'm so glad it finally came to light with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Indigo Disc. It did show what the series could become with more experimentation, but overall, while the base gameplay did start strong and safe, the DLCs did improve on the gameplay and challenge as well. For the graphics and the performance have definitely improved on Nintendo Switch 2, even through backwards compatibility. So we're going to start off with the positives I have with the graphics and performance, and then we're going to move on to the negatives. The resolution has been boosted, and the draw distance is much better, meaning that you can see more Pokemon on screen at once, which does make the world feel more alive than it did on Nintendo Switch 1. The frame rate and loading times have also been improved, and one of my biggest issues with the original Switch version was how inconsistent the performance was between areas. But after testing all three of the main areas, consisting of Paldea, Kitakami, and the Blueberry Academy, I'm happy to say that the frame rate is locked in at a steady 60 frames per second. The addition of HDR support does make the visuals of the game pop out a bit more, especially with the lighting effects and the Pokemon being more vibrant. It is easy to notice the difference between the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2 versions of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and it does really improve on the overall experience on Switch 2 than it does on Nintendo Switch 1. But with that said, despite the positives I have with the graphics and performance, there is still a bit of negatives in there. Shadows do occasionally pop in and out, which can be a bit distracting. In picnic mode, I did run into an issue where the UI did not appear at all, but only the grass was visible, which did make picnic mode really difficult to use. It only happened to me once in picnic mode, but any other time I went into picnic mode, it didn't do that. Inside Yuva Academy, some NPCs do exhibit low draw distance behavior, since the NPCs do not move unless you get closer to them, which is still a problem from the Nintendo Switch 1 era. And this is a minor complaint, but I did find a spot on a cliff where the terrain did look oddly distorted, like something out of an AI generated video. Like, if I moved back and forth between the cliff, the texture kept moving. I don't know if it's just a me problem, or if it's just a problem with everyone on the Switch 2. If you have that issue as well, let me know in the comments. But still, despite the issues I did have with the Switch 2 version of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the overall performance is much more stable than it is on Nintendo Switch 1. And despite the minor flaws, it doesn't ruin the experience. But if you did play Scarlet and Violet on Nintendo Switch 1 and were frustrated with how choppy the visuals were, as well as the lag, the Nintendo Switch 2 version of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is much cleaner. And as soon as you get a Switch 2, I do recommend playing Scarlet and Violet on it. For the characters, I still feel the same way about the characters as I did when I first reviewed it. With the character writing across Scarlet and Violet and its DLCs was kind of a mix of highs and lows. The base game did introduce some standout characters like Nimona, the rival who did bring strong energy to the series, Penny, who was a well-written character, and the twist of her being Cassiopeia was quite intriguing, even though I did feel like it was a bit predictable. And Clavel's undercover persona as Clive was a fun touch that did give him more to do than being the usual professor within the Pokemon games. But on the other hand, the Elite Four and Champion Gita were a bit underwhelming. The Elite Four this time did lack memorable traits, and Gita as the Paldea champion was too easy for me, especially as the top trainer of the region. And the Elite Four and Champion Gita do not offer enough to the story, which do make them generic characters, unlike previous iterations of the Elite Four. But the Teal Mask did add Carmine and Kieran, two siblings who did bring in some personal stakes to the story, especially with Kieran's arc thanks to his transformation throughout the story of the hidden treasure of Area Zero, as his character does evolve into an antagonistic role as we transition into the Indigo Disc. Briar didn't have the most dynamic role, but she did serve her purpose with the expedition theme quite well. And like I said, the Indigo Disc did continue Kieran's arc effectively, which he did become more antagonistic towards the end of the Indigo Disc, but does find redemption. The supporting cast of the Blueberry Academy, such as the quirky club leaders, do flesh out the setting a bit more. And while the character models do lean into a more cartoony style, that may not suit everyone, me included, because it does remind me a bit of Balan Wonderworld. I think you already know how I feel about Balan Wonderworld, so I don't think I need to go on about it again. But the character writing overall was a bit mixed, since some of the characters did show growth and effort, but characters like the Elite Four and Champion Gita did feel a bit hollow. But with better pacing and stronger animations with the characters and the writing, future Pokemon games can improve on the character arcs a bit better, even with a different set of characters. And finally, we have the story. Scarlet and Violet was the first time that there was a bit of a shift in story structure compared to past games, since past Pokemon games did have a more linear structure, meaning that it had to be done in a particular order. But here in Scarlet and Violet, you can go through the story in any order that you want, with each path offering its own tone and structure, with Victory Road being the usual gym badge structure from past Pokemon games, Path of Legends, which did introduce Titan Pokemon, which were tied to mobility upgrades for Koraidon and Miraidon, and Starfall Stream was a bit more of a personal tone, which does uncover the backstory of Team Star. The branching approach that Scarlet and Violet did take this time does give players a bit of freedom, which is rarely seen in Pokemon games, and it kind of paid off. Even though I don't agree with some of the story choices, I do think it was still a solid story, especially once all the paths combine into each other, with the final arc being the Great Crater of Paldea, and the introduction of Paradox Pokemon and the twist of Professor Turo or Sauda, depending on which version you're in, being an AI, which did create a compelling finale, but I did find that element to be a bit predictable. The Teal Mask explored the folklore of Kitakami, exploring the themes of misunderstood legends and sibling rivalry with the tale of Ogerpon. I did find the Teal Mask to be a bit of an interesting story, despite the lack of content we got in the Teal Mask half of the hidden treasure of Area Zero. And Kieran's transformation throughout the DLC does lay some effective groundwork for future events, and the groundwork did come into fruition within the Indigo Disc, as Kieran did evolve into a rival. And when we confront Terapagos, he is redeemed. And Kieran's character arc did give the DLC some emotional stakes that did match the scale of the game quite well. And the conclusion of Area Zero and the tease of time traveling does add a layer of mystery to the game as well. Altogether, I do think Scarlet and Violet did offer some good narrative freedom and some character arcs, even though some of the characters did feel a bit undercut. The storytelling of the game was solid this time, with players having the freedom to do things in any order that they desire. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, to this date, still remains one of the most ambitious entries of the entire Pokemon series. Thanks to the open world freedom, multipath structure, and expanded story depth, and while it was not perfect, it did push the series in a direction I've always wanted to see. And while the base game did struggle with lackluster villains, some technical difficulties, and undercooked visuals, both DLC expansions, particularly the Indigo Disc, did bring in a bit of challenge and innovation to the game. And the Nintendo Switch 2 version, in terms of performance, has made the game more enjoyable, thanks to a quarter of the time I've spent in Pokemon Violet in total being on Nintendo Switch 2. And that is why I have promoted Pokemon Scarlet and Violet from the Play Then Sell perk I handed it to back in 2023 to the Collector perk. And overall, I give Pokemon Scarlet and Violet an 8 out of 10. Even with a few quirks in the performance and the occasional dip in character payoff, I did enjoy my journey through Paldea, Kitakami, and the Blueberry Academy. And I did enjoy my revisit on the Nintendo Switch 2 as well. Even though I didn't go through the whole story again, I mainly revisited it on the Nintendo Switch 2 to finally get the Pokédex finished, which unfortunately the performance on Nintendo Switch 1 made it very difficult to come back to. But with the Switch 2 version of Scarlet and Violet, it nearly feels like the experience that I've always wanted from a Pokemon game. It still has its flaws in terms of the generic characters, and the post-launch support we've seen for Scarlet and Violet has elevated the score quite a bit, as well as the performance in the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game. And that is why Scarlet and Violet has got a promotion in perk and my Pokemon ranking overall. So guys, what did you think of my updated review of Scarlet and Violet? And since I had never done a check-in review until today, I'm going to do a check-in review for Tears of the Kingdom later in the year. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and turn your notification bell on so you don't miss another video like this one in the future. And I will see you all in a future video. BB8 out.